The PM is shouldering all the responsibility of pushing the requirements. The engineering lead will maybe, if there is a lead, will deliver, and the designer will make sure that the design is right, but you shouldn't work this way. You should be partners. You should agree and do most things in agreement, of course respecting the authority of each one in their respective area. It makes such a huge difference. For one thing, when you need to convince the team of something, you don't need to convince 12 people, 12 engineers at the same time. Good luck with that. You just need to talk to the representative.
Why are most product ideas bad?
Well, first is the reality. It's really hard, even for these brilliant people, really good product people, to foresee which ones will work. So it's not your fault if your ideas are failing in experiment. It is your fault if you're not experimenting, if you're not evaluating the idea, if you're not doing research beforehand. The fact that you come up with a collection of ideas and some of them are not good is just normal. I tend to think of PMs as the people that kind of drive the process of discovering that product that maximizes value delivery and value capture. Product management is something that I believe the entire company is doing in collaboration, but there is one function that's their main thing.
The number one mistake that junior PMs make is they just assume that the surface area they were given, the problems they were given, the metrics they were given, were all the right things to work on.
Absolutely. A lot of companies need to move away from.
Welcome to today's episode of the Product Growth Podcast. Thanks for being here, Itamar.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to have this chat with you.
Itamar is one of my favorite voices in product management. He was a PM at Google, at Microsoft, and more recently, he's been a product coach and author of the book Evidence Guided, which if you're on YouTube, you can see right behind him. Today, we're going to be breaking down how to make more of your product launches succeed. So let's start with, why are most product ideas bad?
Well, I like the model that Marty Kagan proposed, that there are 4 risks you need to tackle. So the product needs to be in demand. It should create some value for the customers. It should be feasible to build. It should be usable by the customers and fit in their lives. And it should be business viable. And that, in my mind, is a little bit more murky than we think. It's not just about helping the business, but also not conflicting with some internal projects. So, that's a very good way to kill products, even if they're very good. So very few ideas actually check all the boxes. And most of them are just, the users don't need them. The users are used to use what they have now. So that's just the reality we live in.
So is it some deficiency with the product managers and the executives and the prioritization process that they're choosing?
Well, first is the reality. I mean, if you follow Ronnie Kochavi and other data scientists that are publishing results of A/B experiments, they usually never find more than 1 in 3 ideas tested actually succeed. And it's really hard, even for these brilliant people, really good product people, to foresee which ones will work. So it's not your fault if your ideas are failing in experiment. It is your fault if you're not experimenting, if you're not evaluating the idea, if you're not doing research beforehand. That's the bulk of my writing in this book. But I think the fact that you come up with a collection of ideas and some of them are not good is just normal.
Yeah, that's what I've learned in my years of doing product is when I first started, let's say maybe like even the first 5 or 6 years of my career, I thought that there was a certain level of good prioritization we could do so that just 100% of our features would hit. And I would like build my OKRs based on assumptions that all these features would A, ship in the quarter, and then B, have the expected result. But in reality, any product practitioner knows that's not how it works out.
Yeah, for sure. I call this the fiction of predictability. And I'm glad to say that we moved a long way in the last couple of decades, but still in a lot of companies, product managers are finding themselves exactly in your seat and exactly in that position.
Today's episode is brought to you by June, the customer analytics for product-focused teams. Are you not sure what users do in your SaaS? What features they use the most? Do you wish that you could know what each company does and use this information to generate incremental lift in revenue? June is the product analytics platform you need. It generates profiles for each of your customers that get you closer to your most important ones. It also connects your product data to your CRM so you can get a full view of your customers in one place. So you can engage with the right message at the right time. What makes June different is that it's made for B2B SaaS. It comes with account-level analyses, fast ways to look up your customers, and CRM integrations to share this information between your product, your success, and sales teams. And one line of code is all you need, and you're good to go. Sign up for a free trial today at june.so/Aakash. That's june.so/AAKASH. You get a discount if you use my link. The future of marketing is word of mouth. Turn your users and partners into your most valuable growth channel with podcast partner Cello. Cello is the only all-in-one solution to engage your most passionate users and partners to refer your product with just a few clicks. Best of all, Cello is directly embedded into your product and handles everything from referral payments to tax and compliance. And it runs on autopilot, so you can focus on scaling and building your own product. Here's how it works. First, within just a few hours, Cello integrates with your product and existing tools to automate all manual work. In your dashboard, you can then set up your referral campaign, define the reward details, and make the referral experience your own. After the program goes live, Cello continuously analyzes and scales its performance based on AI-generated recommendations. Plus, you only pay for successful. Go give it a try for free and learn more about user-led growth at cello.so/product growth. So I think that one way to potentially have not a third of your experiments succeed, but maybe half, is to be more evidence guided. And I've told this story on the podcast before, but when I was a VP of product at Apollo, my most senior PM reporting to me, something like 16 years of ICPM experience, he was a principal PM at the time, I shared with him this idea that I had been working on with the board, with the C-suite for weeks as like, okay, this is going to be this great thing that we should build. And so I was like, okay, so when are we going to build this? Like, when is this going to happen? And he pulls up your confidence meter and he starts talking to me about this, and he's very like couch too. He's not like in my face about it, but he's like, I've been reading this guy Itamar, I really like his work. He's shown this confidence meter, and based on this confidence meter, that idea, even though all of the executives and yourself are excited, is like, I'm not sure where it landed, but something like a 2 out of 100. So I love that tool, and I started using it in my work as well. So can you just explain the confidence meter for people who don't know it?
Well, to begin with, that's one of the main use cases. And I hope it was accepted by the other executives as well at Apollo, that this was a valid way to look at things and not challenging their powers. So essentially, it's a tool that's going to help you answer the question, how sure are you when you have an idea in your hand? It's going to have the expected impact on the goals and the expected cost. But in the impact part, that's where most of the variability lives, most of the uncertainty. And I saw way too many executives and PMs being overly confident about their ideas and saying, this is a sure thing. This is going to create an impact of 9 out of 10 if you use the ICE model. And I'm pretty convinced the confidence is at 8. So I really wanted to find a tool that will help people kind of calibrate. So what you're seeing in front of you is the confidence meter. It works a little bit like a thermometer. It goes from very low confidence, which is the blue area, all the way to full confidence, which is the red area. And you have numbers along the way from 0 to 10. So it kind of matches with ICE scoring, if that's what you like to use. But you don't have to use it with ICE. And basically what I try to do is put along the wheel different classes of evidence you might come across. For example, everything that you see in the upper right corner, all the dark blue stuff, is forms of opinions, whether it's the self-conviction of the person who invented it, or it's a pitch deck that explains why this conviction is true, or it's aligned with some theme, generative machine learning or the blockchain, whatever, wherever you want to pick a time, there's always a theme that might support. And then there's other things like reviews. This is the light blue area, reviews with other people, or some sort of business modeling you do on paper, like a back of the envelope calculation, for example. That gives you a little bit more confidence, but still you never go beyond 0.5 because these are all numbers kind of pulled out of thin air. So these are low levels of confidence. In order to gain more confidence, you need to collect data. It could be anecdotal. For example, one competitor has exactly the same feature is a common anecdote, or a couple of customers ask for this feature is an anecdote. But if you have market data, so you have larger data sets that support the assumptions behind the idea, that's even stronger. And for some ideas, you can stop here. If the initial data supports it, it's a low risk idea, it's not very expensive, you can stop there and basically launch the idea and look at the results. But for most other ideas, I would suggest going further into tests. And tests, there's various forms of tests, usability tests, there's data analysis tests, there's A/B experiments, which are maybe the most rigorous, and they give us medium and high levels of confidence. So the way you use the tool is basically just go around and ask yourself, do I have that level of confidence? And you stop where the needle stops and say, okay, I have 1 out of 10. That's pretty low confidence. It's probably not enough to launch a really big feature.
And what's really provocative about the meter is that essentially the entire right side of the meter, self-conviction, pitch deck, thematic support, others' opinion, estimates and plans, all of these are scoring less than 1. And you really need to actually get into data and evidence to start scoring between 1 and 10. How did you assign these numbers? It's obviously very intentional that you rated them this way.
It's extremely opinionated, and it's based on my own anecdotal experience working with many product teams. First off, the numbers are not set in stone. You can adjust them. They're flexible. If you work in a large B2B and 2 large customers say, I'm interested in a feature, that's probably higher than 0.5 that I'm giving it here. So you can bump it into a 2. But is it a 10? Is it full confidence? Probably not, because these customers are not very good at predicting their future behavior. Once they have the product in their hand, it may not exactly deliver the value they expect, etc. So that's why you shouldn't really just flatten the curve and say, all right, I can stop here. If I do this relatively low confidence test and it's a yes, that's it. I don't need to test anymore. And let's be honest, there's a lot of pressure to condense the discovery phase and run forward with delivery always. So change the numbers. They're not scientific, but I think as a rule of thumb, this is a good starting point for most organizations.
Yeah, we had Ed Biden on the podcast, and we were actually discussing this confidence meter. And we were both talking about how the most common form of pushback we get is on those numbers when we use this in practice. And he came up with a really cool sort of antidote to that. So he said he runs a workshop where he shows the meter without numbers. And then he has people help with the numbers. And if people don't like the meter, he simply just has those elements of thematic support, data, and people create a ranking of them. So it seems like the key takeaway is that anecdotal evidence is a lot less important than data, but the numbers you put on it and how you represent it can really change team to team.
Absolutely. I think in general, every process anyone gives you is not set in stone. You need to take it, you need to test it on your own, and you need to modify it for your particular context. So absolutely see this as a starting point. And I really like Ed's exercise. It sounds really high value to me.
Cool. So what's the story behind how you came up with this meter? Was this a technique you were trying to crystallize for the book? Did this come out of some work you were doing when you were at Google or Microsoft? What is how was the sausage made behind this framework? Because I have to be honest, I think of the frameworks I've seen created in product management over the last 5 years, this has to be one of the top 3 in terms of how widespread and continuously used it is.
I have to be honest, I don't remember exactly the spark and what led to it. There was an article before where I tried to do give a questionnaire, and you would answer questions and then I would give you a number. I was secretly hoping people would call this the Gilad number, and it would be the Itamar number, and it would be very common around the industry, and none of this happened. No one read the article, but I still like the concept. And in general, all of my articles are based on discussions I have with product people where I see they have a real problem. They really need to bring in-house the concept of evidence. They really need to kind of defeat the sense of we're taking too much risk, but I cannot prove it because everyone in the company is really convinced. So I think that was the kind of the instigator of this idea, but no clear story that I can recall, sorry.
All right. I'm glad you're honest and didn't just come up with something. All those marketing stories out there, sometimes they're just too much detail for them to possibly be true.
Yeah.
So you had some unkind words about Brian Chesky's approach to PM at Airbnb. If I looked at all of your LinkedIn posts and I ranked them by likes, and your 3 posts about Brian Chesky and Airbnb PM have, I think, an order of magnitude more than all of the other content. So I actually want to read one of them back to you. In this environment, there's no room for product managers in the sense of the role whose job in collaboration with engineering, UX design, and others is to find the product that creates the highest value for users and for the business. Successful product companies create a balance between managerial and team decisions, between product UX engineering, between opinions and evidence. In this world, product management is very much needed. Can you explain?
So I think some context is required. And I will qualify everything I know about the transformation that Brian Chesky brought about in Airbnb is based on external reports. I don't know him personally. I have the highest regard for him. Of course, he achieved tremendous things and is regarded as one of the best CEOs in Silicon Valley. So he transformed the company to make it much more design-centric, very much in the kind of classic Apple model, Steve Jobs. And as part of that, he moved what I consider the company a few steps back into history. He moved PMs back to marketing. And maybe some of the audience don't know, but we started marketing. We used to be brand managers in packaged consumer goods, like in Procter & Gamble, for example. That's the start, the 1960s version of product management. But then companies like Microsoft and HP realized it's much better to have this function inside the product organization. So at Airbnb, it's no longer there. There are PMMs. They work very closely with the product org, but they are not part of the core team that kind of defines the product. That's my understanding anyway. So that's one thing. The other thing is kind of the importance of design as the one methodology to build good products. And I have the highest respect to designers. I have many good friends who are designers, of course. But I think that is a bit 2010-ish, where we were. I don't know if you remember that period where design thinking was sold as the one solution to everything. And that comes with some baggage, like hating on A/B experiments, for example. And Airbnb used to be a very quantitative-driven company with very good infrastructure for A/B experiments and data scientists, and now they do a lot less of that. And that's, again, something that Brian Chesky is saying, and they're much more about qualitative. I like a balance of the two. I don't think one should replace the other, and I don't think either one is bad. And I think, in general, the thing I like least about what he's saying is this centrist model. Again, very Steve Jobsian, where ideas can come from anywhere, from the bottom, but the decisions come from the top. So you need to review your ideas and you need to do in-detail product review. And the product person is actually the senior manager. There's usually in Apple, there was a series of senior managers that reviewed the designs and decided what works and what doesn't. And eventually Steve Jobs was the authority. And I don't know how it works in Airbnb, but I think Brian is the authority. So all of this is great, maybe for Airbnb, because Brian is such a strong product guy. I don't think this will work in most other companies. you know as well as I do, most companies don't have such strong, powerful leaders, and they're much better off distributing the decisions into product managers that are kind of representing the business within the product teams and enabling these product teams to make decisions without having to go to the higher hubs. So that's kind of my pushback.
Yeah, it's kind of that moving backwards in time, but I think that is honestly what he was going for. So recently on Twitter, what's been blowing up, and even Shreyas Doshi and Marty Kagan have commented on it now, is founder mode. And founder mode is based on this Jobsian, now Brian Chesky-ian idea. And I think you told an interesting story that it's not just Brian Chesky, that Larry Page had his own moment of inspiration around founder mode well before Paul Graham had labeled it as such. Can you tell us that story?
For sure. And I want to qualify. I think founders are extremely important, and I don't think we should disempower them. And I feel when I hear Brian speak, he felt disempowered. He felt he distributed a lot of the decision-making. He felt it was the wheel is slipping from his hand. He wanted to bring in some of the power to, and that's legitimate. And I think a lot of founders are really the most important product people in the organization. It's just about how you do it. You can be very centralist about it, and you can be more delegating. And I think to each his own, they need to find a balance. What happened with Google, I think, is an example of how it might go wrong. So Google, for a very long time, had this triumvirate of Larry Page, Sergey Brin, and Eric, Eric was the CEO, and the two founders were kind of co-leading on the technical side. And then Larry took the helm and became the CEO. I think it was 2010. Roughly when I joined Google. And that brought about a lot of changes, and I think some of them were also inspired by Apple. So everyone was observing Apple in the 2000s and this remarkable sequence of products, the iPod, the iPhone, and then the iPad. And everyone was asking, what's the playbook? How are they making this immense success? And everyone, I think, got a very shallow understanding from the outside of what's going on, but didn't really understand how the Apple model, which is very unique to Apple, worked. So what we copied is, again, a huge devotion to design. All of a sudden, design became the most important thing in Google, and we started doing a lot of designing things that honestly some of them that our users didn't like. And second was a lot of these big bad ideas. No more incremental stuff. Let's just go big on big ideas. And then we got Google Plus and Google Glass and Google Now and a bunch of other huge projects that sucked up so many resources and didn't really create a lot of value for most of the users. Maybe some power users, yes, but most people didn't like them and didn't use them. And I think in hindsight, it didn't really do well for Google because we abandoned our own DNA, which was about let 1,000 flowers bloom. Try many ideas. Think big, but start small. Fail fast. None of these big batch projects actually worked according to this template. And the leaders are very explicit that they don't want us to work this way anymore. And a lot of Googlers didn't like it, me included, as a new Googler. So I think it's okay to be inspired by the trend. You want to be founder-led, go for it. But be cautious. Don't just copy the template. Try to understand what works for your organization, what's really are the strengths, what's the DNA, and find something that works for you, really.
Yeah, the analogy I've put out there for this new trend of founder mode is I almost see it like fashion, like in clothes. You know, when I was in middle school, everybody was wearing baggy clothes. Then there was a huge shift into skinny clothes. Now it's swinging back into baggy clothes. And I'm like hearing all my parents tell me fashion is a circle, fashion is a circle. And I feel like management philosophy tends to kind of be this circle. There's only this limited range of options. You can be more micromanagery or less micromanagery. You can have more control or less control. And it feels like we've kind of gone through that cycle a couple times. And at the height of the ZERP era, I think we were at the peak, like don't micromanage, like build a humongous org, empower your org, have 1,000 product teams all running their own roadmaps, but you just give them the problems and the metrics. And I think we got a little bit away from product leaders actually actually examining the pixels, product leaders actually showing up to design reviews, product leaders actually being able to input on the solution, because the mantra just became metrics, problems, metrics, problems.
Yeah. The cynical part of me says that thinks that you put your finger on it. In the days where money was cheap, it was easy to do these things and still get by very well. But once you start realizing you overhired, that the business is not doing as well when money is not cheap, you realize you need to start taking more control. So that's why these fashionable philosophies are more appealing maybe today than 5 years ago. And I totally see these cycles also in product methodology, by the way. I see things coming and going. And of course, in technology, there are fashions. So be aware. Like the benefit of being older, like you and I, is that we've seen enough of those to know.
Yeah, what I tend to find is that when you're young, it feels like this is the new insight, founder mode. And now I finally understood it. But it's not actually a new insight. I think you could probably trace it back maybe even like 100 years to like Taylorism and when they started really like managing people like units and all of that. So it's just come back into fashion.
Exactly. And what's surprising about this article that I wrote is that a surprising number of people commented, yeah, product management and marketing is one and the same. And that's an idea I haven't heard in, I don't know how long. I think when I started product managing in the year 2000, no one said this already, at least not in Israel where I'm from. But now all of a sudden, yeah, product management actually belongs in marketing. I'm really shocked by that.
Yeah. Well, if you think about the original marketing framework, the 4 Ps, it's like price, place, product, promotion. So product would be like 1/4 of marketing. And I do remember when I was at ThreadUp, I actually spent a year reporting to the CMO. So I think like there are some companies out there that are still kind of stuck in that old way. All right. So another one of your hot takes is against product owners. And I think the against product owners take a lot of people might agree with. I believe even like Marty Kagan has been against this role. But there is a role that I still see at Apple, at Microsoft, at Google. So at a lot of the companies that people kind of herald as amazing. Meta, I know, recently laid off most of their people in this role, but the role is technical program management. And I'm curious, what is your take on this role?
So I think project management is also one of these things that went through transformations. So maybe in your early days, like mine, managing the project was such an important role because it was all waterfallish and you had to coordinate these 100 different things together. So you needed project managers to do it. And then Agile came in and swept and said, this is all wrong. Waterfall is wrong. What we're doing now is Scrum or Kanban. And you had to find a role for these people. So some of them actually turned into Agile coaches or Scrum Masters or one of these roles. And I feel there's a lot of value in these roles. I mean, a technical program manager, we had them also in Google. In certain big projects, you need them. I don't have anything bad to say about them. I am a bit concerned about, again, trying to revert to the classic PMO model with like this central project management function that things like SAFe are trying to bring about, where you're trying to coordinate all these agile teams into this mega thing with launch trains and big room planning. And it's pretty horrific. And for that, you need, again, project managers. So my take is try to keep it simple. I think we're overdoing agile today. That's my not so hot take. I think a lot of people are coming to this conclusion. I have nothing against product owners, by the way. If you're doing a real product manager job, which for me includes both working with the team, but also observing the market, the customers, the business, becoming an expert on all of these things, then call yourself what you want. I don't care about the title. But trying to split these two things and saying this person is just tactical delivery, working with the agile team, feeding them user stories so they will work at 100% capacity, while some other smarter person is thinking about big ideas, I think that's terrible. And it's been tried for decades. It just doesn't work. So I prefer that you if that's what you're doing, that you will reconsider.
I think the interesting thing about all those big tech companies is that they usually, in my experience, having worked at Google, they don't have any problem with keeping engineers at 100% utilization. I only encountered that problem with lower quality engineers. Once you start paying engineers $500K, $1 million, when they can become an L8 and make $1.5 million, they tend to keep themselves busy. So it's more about how do you allocate them to projects that are not only going to be great technically and look good in engineering promotion reviews and engineering hiring packets, but also will do well for the business, that will also do well for the users. And that's where I feel like product management really comes in and adds value. What I saw with technical program managers is typically the person who would hire this, who would really get the headcount for this, was often like a director of engineering or a very senior engineering manager who basically wanted to offload a lot of their activities like managing their Jira and running their weekly demos and sending out updates on the progress of their bug squashes. So I almost feel that role was more of like a chief of staff to director of engineering or project manager for engineering manager type of role.
At the risk of being flamed, I might say that this sounds remarkably like what product operation is for some product leads and CPOs. So yeah, I agree with you. I think you need to see the perspective also outside the States. I don't know how exposed you are to European companies or Asian companies, but many of these companies discovered Agile before they discovered product management. They didn't have product managers. They had, I don't know what was before, very traditional coding. And then someone brought in Scrum and said, this is the new hotness. This will make you agile. This will get your engineers to code at 10x the capacity. And for a lot of MBA trained managers, this seems like magic. This is exactly what we're trying to do. This is very tailored, like how do we increase production, input versus output. And then they realize they need this function that they don't own called a product owner. And sometimes they converted project managers into product owners. It's all sorts of ways to recruit these people, but it's not what you and I would consider a classic product manager. And a lot of these product owners are trained with the mission of keep the delivery train moving as fast and as smoothly as possible. Just give them the requirements. And it doesn't matter if it's good or bad, just do it. And I think that's a lot of the people I speak with that are working this model know that it's not good. And they want to change. And they want to bring in a lot of these new philosophies that you and I teach. But it's really big cultural change.
Yeah. That being unhappy with your situation, I think it's probably the thing I face now that I'm a content creator that I didn't realize before, because I mainly worked at really successful tech companies where PMs were doing PM work. But now I'm finding that probably like 50-60% of PMs, they're not happy with the state of their job because they're being handed features. They are being pushed to be project managers. And sometimes while they're being handed features, they're also expected to somehow be product managers. And it's like, you're giving me one 40-hour job in project management, and then you want me to do an extra job on top of that in terms of actually talking to users and looking at metrics. So I feel like PMs are like stuck in this conundrum. And there's this advice out there like, yeah, well, do more product management work within your team. But if you only have a limited amount of time to do it, what are the tactical tips? How can a PM who's kind of disillusioned in this environment slowly upgrade their situation?
Oof, that's the $100 billion question. I think it's not a coincidence that SVPG, Marty Kagan, recently published a book called Transformed. I think this is kind of the new wave in product management. You and I and anyone who's trying to consult organizations pretty soon realize there's only so much you can advise the product teams on how to improve, because then you run into this wall that the culture of the company, the operating system of the company, if you like, is just not conducive to working in this way. And the managers, the higher you go up, the more resistance you will encounter to these ideas. And on a fundamental level, many of them just don't think this way. They're very revenue driven. They're very customer request driven. It's a bit like a services company versus what you and I will consider a product company. So I think it's a multi-pronged thing. No one has a real solution. I don't know. Maybe Transformed gives you the answer, but I'm not sure anyone has a clear answer. There's a lot you can do with the product team, because if you train them all together, I found, say in a workshop, I do a lot of these workshops, I always say, bring your engineering leads, bring your designers, bring your PMMs. We all sit together and we do the exercises together. The penny drops, they all want to work this way from now on. They don't want to go back. But then the inevitable question is, how do I get my managers to work the same way? And I dedicated the whole chapter in this book just to this, the last chapter, how to circumvent different objections and how to introduce the change in a way that is more likely to succeed. Again, not 100% guaranteed. What I like to do is first, just a few tips. Show them how much money they're losing, because revenue and money is usually what they really are concerned about. So do a gentle analysis of the last 2 years' roadmaps, all these must-have things that we launched for all these very important features, and what happened. Half of them we didn't launch because it turned out we couldn't get the capacity. The other half that we did launch actually didn't create the business impact we expected, and they cost twice as much, best case scenario. So we're wasting a huge amount of our development force, which is probably the most expensive resource in the organization, on developing the wrong things. So something in the system is not working. Show them that there's a problem, so they're more motivated. And then gently try to carve out an area and say, in this group, these 3 teams will try to work in the new way, and try to very transparently and share with you constantly what's happening. Try not to pick something that is very central to the company, but more sideline. And try within a couple of quarters already to show some wins. Like we tripled the rate of features that actually get high engagement, or we ran many more experiments and we were able to kill ideas much earlier and pivot to better ideas. Things like that. I think a lot of managers really want this, but they just don't know. They have no clue how modern product works. So if someone inside the organization takes the initiative and shows them, I think that's actually a good thing. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I like the idea of choosing a part of the business where the executives aren't dictating every feature, because every company I've been a part of, there is this universe that the CEO cares about. That creates the universe that the executives care about. But that inherently can't be 100% of what you're building. So I often actually took my growth teams to parts of those areas of the business too, because I knew then that we could go out and do actual discovery. We wouldn't be dictated with, oh, you can't do that, you can just do this. Especially with a growth team, it was nice. We could just say okay, we're going to move this metric. And nobody is doing anything. So an example of this is at a firm. A firm has 4 tabs in its app: home, shopping, manage, and account. So which tab do 80% of users go to when they open the app? Manage, because they're managing an existing loan. But where was all the companies focused? On the other tabs, because they thought this tab, it's set, it's highly engaged. So we went to that tab and we figured out what are the growth things we can do within this tab. And that led to a lot of success. So I love this idea of first, show them the numbers, and then second, move into some part of the business where you can operate in this way without inevitably running into the roadblocks that a large transformation would.
Yeah, and I love that example. That's exactly what you need to do. Often it is the mid-level managers that need to shoulder a lot of the responsibility, or the CPO, like you have done. It's hard for the team at the team level leadership to do this on their own, unless it's a very democratic company.
Yep. So another thing that is related to this idea of PMs having too much to do and being upset is they have so many artifacts. And you've said that PMs are plagued by the need to produce tons of artifacts. Finding lighter weight and more efficient ways to communicate that same context and to hold meaningful discussions is a worthwhile goal. So what are some of your top ways to make the PM artifact burden more lightweight?
So like you, I was blessed with working in what I consider modern product companies. And there wasn't this concept that the PM or PO is generating this stream of tickets and or requirements and just fed into the development, and the developers process it a bit and maybe ask some question, but that's kind of, it's mini waterfall in a sense. And when I started consulting, I was shocked to see that that's how it works in a lot of companies. So I think the change has to do with a few things. First off, I think we should change the entire way we develop. This plan and execute stopped working in the 1970s, like roadmaps, classic roadmaps, if you want, we can talk about them, and well-defined, like perfectly prioritized backlogs. Doesn't work. We have a lot of uncertainty and complexity in front of us. We need to learn to work in a different way. I think for every project or every goal you work on, there's usually 4 phases. There's a research phase where you do some exploratory research. There's a discovery phase where you try out multiple ideas you came up with during the research phase and you eliminate most of them and you're left with some that are validated enough. Then a delivery phase, and then a tracking phase where you may need to iterate or maybe fix some things. And I think working in this way enables us to focus on the things that are important, also to be honest that we don't know what we don't know. So when I was a young PM, and we're talking, early 2000s, I was writing 50-page, 100-page PRDs, product requirement documents. And exactly. I would lock myself in a room and come up with this huge thing. And then I realized no one is reading this. No one has the patience. The engineers were disregarding me, but they were asking for it. It was the contract, if you like. And then over time, my PRDs became lighter and lighter, and I started seeing them as skeletons, as kind of conversation starters. They frame the problem, they explain the goals and the non-goals, they explain some of the context that we know, but then they are full of TBDs. Like, we need to define what this is, we need to define what the right user experience is, we need to define, we're not even sure which sub-customer segment we need to attack. And throughout this 4-phase thing, they're in the research, discovery, delivery, we are answering these questions. And the PRD starts being fleshed out, but it's not by the opinions of the PM, but the conclusions that the team comes up with. And sometimes managers help us, sometimes stakeholders, sometimes the clients themselves, the customers. So the PRD just reflects the growing learning. But what's important is the conversation and the process of discovery behind it. And at some point you dump the PRD. It's not perfect, but there's no point in keep recording. The product itself becomes the spec. It changes so fast there's no point in keeping track of the changes. So that's how I like to work, and that's how I worked at Google. And if I tried anything else, my engineers would burn me to the stake.
Yeah, I think the PRD, it has to be the document that I think is going to change the most in the next couple of years, because that contract, we really need to industry-wide kind of get rid of that contract. Like, even in the early 2000s, you faced the 50-page contract, but as recently as last year, from certain engineers coming from certain environments, I would face engineers who still wanted like a 5-6-page PRD, which had all of the edge cases, all of the everything thought out. But in fact, I think what a good PRD is nowadays is it's actually very concise. It's actually written like in a compelling way. Like, it doesn't have a formulaic, we just filled in the template, but instead, like, the best PRDs I've seen, they have a custom structure. They'll often say like, these are the big unknowns left in this feature, but here's what we know. We've de-risked the main big risk we thought it was via X usability test. We put this prototype in front of users. Now we just need to figure out all the edge cases and all the metrics. So design and engineering, you go figure out the edge cases. Analytics, you go figure out the metrics. Like, it's almost like a collaboration document instead of like a spec per se.
Exactly. And it is an important communication tool because a lot of people will bug you and say, okay, what are you planning? What's coming? So you can share with them the PRD and say, read it and see that a lot of things are still undefined, but you can see what we already decided or what's known or what was validated, as you said. And I think that's very interesting for them to track it and to know how advanced you are so that they can calibrate how much work they can need to do. And it also helps a bit with working with these stakeholders. So in some companies, marketing is pushing really hard for specific specs and mock-ups because they want to prepare their marketing documents. So if you give them a PRD that is not authoritative, but saying, we're not sure, here's a whiteboard sketch of what we might be launching, just FYI, but it may change dramatically, I think that's a good message for them to know I shouldn't start writing the Marcom stuff just yet, but I should track it. And I think the whole company should move into this model of stop doing handovers and stop faking predictability and really be honest about what you don't know just yet.
Yeah, faking predictability. That's a term I'm going to need to pick up. That's exactly what people are doing is I've had CEOs come back to me with my roadmap and say, yes, but can you please put all of the exact engineering months and the revenue so that I can go myself and decide like, okay, not this item, but this item. And we're just faking predictability. We're just creating false precision when we create these documents for our executives. So the PRD is one artifact. I think that there's two other artifacts I tend to see PMs are responsible for. One is like whatever their planning artifact is. For some people, it might be a Gantt chart, like I just explained. For other people, it might be a roadmap. For some people, it's a product strategy document. In the best case, it often is a product strategy document. What is your take on that artifact? Like, how do we lighten the burden or how do we right size the burden?
So we're talking about the thing that kind of describes the longer term, the bigger picture. And I think there's no one right answer there. There's a bunch of attempts. I have my own ideas, and they're all legitimate. But there are some things that we know don't work very well. I think the classic time-based roadmap is not a very successful model. Partly because we're really bad at predicting what will happen 6 months from now. I talked about the analysis of the last 2 years' roadmaps and how badly we are doing at predicting what will ship on time and how badly we are at predicting what will create value or not. But if you commit to the yearly roadmap or the 6-month roadmap, you are forcing yourself to decide very early on with very partial data, with a lot of assumptions that are not validated, which are the best ideas. And then usually the decision will come to either highest paid person opinion or some consensus or whatever the customer asks. And those are very weak heuristics. If you go back to my confidence meter, they are way up there in between 0 and 0.1. Honestly, it's very low confidence. So I prefer for the roadmap to look completely different. There is a hybrid model, by the way. It's called the now, next, later, very popular now, which tries to condense the horizon and say we're only being committal for 3 months. And after that, we have some ideas, but we're not committing. It's an improvement, but I think we can do even better. But if it works for you, by the way, throw away everything I'm going to say. Just use what actually is giving you value. I have a slide about it. If you want, I can project it. All right, so I have a slide about it. If you want, I'll show you. Let me just share real quick. So this is my version of the outcomes roadmap. It's not my idea, of course, but it's one way to do it. It's basically, this is at a company level. Let's say this is a mid-sized company. The company has 4 OKRs this year, or 4 main goals. One is to boost up security and privacy. There are a bunch of KRs associated with it, but maybe the most important is to get 100% of customers protected. High availability, support new countries, launch process improvements, whatever it is that the company decides is really important. And for each one of those, we need to be get good at moving them on a timeline. And I really think we should plan the year. I don't think we should confine ourselves just for a quarter. What are we trying to achieve by the end of the year? All 4 of those, but probably not all at the same time. So what should we start with? And CPOs, CTOs, CFOs need to develop the skill of being able to plan on a timeline without actually knowing exactly what will be developed. Just kind of eyeballing it, ballparking it, and saying, okay, we think we can do security and privacy partially in parallel, but support new countries will have to come much later. But some ideas, once they are validated enough and we are committed to them and we're willing to deliver them, we can definitely put as a classic roadmap items. So these items probably were validated already because we started working on privacy and security already last year. And those ideas we can actually commit to an ETA. Say we're delivering, it might slip, but we know that these are high value ideas. So definitely don't be shy of putting those there. As you move through time, more and more of these concrete things will populate the map. If you want to expand each one of those, this is kind of the model I mentioned. So in some things you need to spend, I don't know, a couple of weeks on exploratory research, which will yield some ideas. Then you validate these ideas. You don't have to wait until the research ends. You can jump right into validation, discovery. And then once you find an idea that's sufficiently validated, and again, you can use my confidence meter for this, you switch into delivery. But take into account that just launching the idea is not the end. You need to track it, and there's some effect lag where you need to track the idea and see if it's doing what it's supposed to. And only then you can call it done and say you achieved the goal. But of course, you don't need the entire team for everything. So for the research phase, you may need a couple of one engineer, one data analyst, data scientist, and a PM. Discovery, a few more. For delivery, probably a lot more of the team. And for tracking later, you don't need almost no one. So you need to balance this and move the team to other goals in parallel as the capacity becomes available.
This is awesome. So we'll include this in the show notes so people can just pick this up and use this. As a product leader, I feel like I would have loved to just have these templates so that I could build the slides. So I think these are the first slides. I would say these are kind of like the summary slides. We showed the year view, then we double clicked into the view of the progress across certain big rocks. Are there additional supporting slides that people should have? For instance, for those features that have hit confidence meter 10, where they start to show the prototypes and things like that, or should they stop here? This episode is brought to you by Adio, the next generation CRM. Imagine a world where your CRM is powerful, easily configured, and actually intuitive. Adio makes that a reality. As I've profiled in the Product Growth newsletter, setting up Adio takes less than a minute, and within seconds of syncing your email and calendar, you'll see your relationships in one place, enriched with valuable data, including things like relationship strength. Adio lets you build Zapier-style automations, create powerful reports, and works for any go-to-market motion, from PLG to sales-led. Adio is designed for the next era of companies like yours. And companies like yours shouldn't have to deal with inflexible, one-size-fits-all CRMs. Join industry leaders like 11 Labs, Replicate, and Modal. Head to adio.com/product growth and you'll get 15% off your first year. That's attio.com/product growth. Tired of spending your days and nights managing all your paperwork processes with multiple tools? Good news. Today's podcast partner, Anvil, is a document AI that helps you build software for your paperwork processes at ludicrous speed. Turn your PDFs into templates in seconds. Anvil Document AI identifies input fields, assigns labels, and even prepares your document for signature. What if you could transform your templates into web forms in the blink of an eye and embed them into your application for a seamless user experience? The best part? Anvil separates your structured data from your PDFs so you can power your business with data, not documents, making it fully operational. The next time you're stuck processing PDFs, creating web forms, or gathering e-signatures, remember, you can do it faster with Anvil Document AI. So visit useanvil.com/Aakash. That's useanvil.com/Aakash. AAKASH. Don't get PDF'd.
I think there is one thing that really is important for people to track, which is the work in progress. People really want to know what are you working on and what are you doing and what have you learned. And for that, behind the confidence meter, there's a larger framework called GIST, Goals, Ideas, Steps, and Tasks, which is basically the main topic of my book. And it kind of breaks up the problem of moving to this more modern, evidence-guided mode of development into these 4 areas. These are the ideas we're working on right now. In the idea bank, you might have other ideas that are waiting for their turn in case these ones don't work. But right now, those are the ones we're working on. And these are the steps like data validation, A/B experiment. Each one is a little build, measure, learn thing or validation, data validation technique. And I have in the book many that you can pick from that teaches us something about the idea, generate some evidence. And based on that, we can readjust. So we might decide this idea is not as strong as we thought because the data validation shows that it's not a very valid idea. So we can strip it off and put another idea in its place. So what I suggest is the leads will construct this board and the team will meet around it every other week, usually before they plan the next cycle or sprint. And it's a very, very important tool to remind people that they're not just working on pushing small increments of code into production. They're actually trying to validate ideas, and these are the ideas, maybe some that they suggested, and those are connected to a few concrete goals that the team committed to deliver this quarter. So a lot of developers who are using this system are telling me this is exactly what we were missing. Now I understand what I'm working on. Now it's easier. Now I don't need a PM to tell me exactly what to do because I have the context. And it's kind of how I worked with my team at Google, not with this exact tool, but it's same inspiration. And I wish that every PM out there could work like this way. It's so much more rewarding for everyone involved.
And it sounds like a key to making this work is that the triad or quad, whoever are kind of the key leads from each of the functions on the product team, they all are of the same shared mind. They all understand each item here on this board.
Absolutely. I think the trio or triad or quad is super, super important here. This is another concept that a lot of teams are missing. It's like the PM is shouldering all the responsibility of pushing the requirements. The engineering lead will maybe, if there is a lead, will deliver, and the designer will make sure that the design is right. But you shouldn't work this way. You should be partners. You should agree and do most things in agreement, of course, respecting the authority of each one in their respective area. It makes such a huge difference. For one thing, when you need to convince the team of something, you don't need to convince 12 people, 12 engineers at the same time. Good luck with that. You just need to talk to the representative, which is the tech lead, and that person may disagree with you, and then maybe you change your mind. But if he or she agrees, then they will talk to the team, or you will talk to the team together, and they will help you deal with all the objections and misunderstandings. So it's much better also as a way of working with the team. So highly recommended, and I agree with you. It's key for the success.
Okay. And related to that point around collaborating with engineers, you've said it's often frustrating to leaders and product managers to see how much engineers don't get the customers in the business. It's rarely because they don't care. Rather, the process cuts them out from this knowledge and the incentives push them towards execution goals. So what can a PM do when there's these incentives and process in the way to help their engineers get closer to the customers and the business?
I think if you're able to do at least some of the things we mentioned, like switch from focusing on launching ideas to switch to achieving goals, which is in its own right a huge, huge achievement for a lot of organizations. If you are able to explain to the engineers and to their managers that they're not just there to code, they're not code monkeys, and that's a kind of a late development, by the way. Back in the days when I was an engineer, no one thought of us this way. We were designing the product, we were doing an awful lot of things, we were running experiments. So move away from this model and tell them, these people can do research, these people can do discovery, these people can do delivery. Absolutely, they can track the results, they can talk to customers, they can do an awful lot of things. So let's remove all the incentives that are about how much code is pushed to production, how fast. Let's move this away and let's focus more on outcomes. And I think that changes a lot of the dynamics. So both the PM and the team understand what's expected from them has changed. And if you do these regular meetings around the gist board or something equivalent, I mean, Teresa Torres' model, OST, does a very similar thing to broaden the perspective and to get everyone involved. And there are other models too. Dramatic change. And it's much more fun, and it's also much more engaging for them, because a lot of people are working on this 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, depending on the size of the company, project where they're just coding and meeting in a circle and coding and meeting in a circle, and they don't see the end of it. They're just sprinting. Here, every few weeks, they launch something to a small subset of customers, and they measure the results, and they see if the idea works or not. It's so much more exciting, so much more alive. It's a much better way to work, honestly, for everyone.
Yeah, the one thing that launching often does, though, is it creates a burden for you to actually go back and check your results. And we walked through now kind of roadmaps and strategy. We walked through PRDs. That's the final area that PMs as an artifact tend to have to own. I call them feature results write-ups. I think that name hasn't stuck, but everybody has their own name for it. Basically, these is what actually happened. Right. And somebody needs to do it. Usually the PM ends up doing it. What is your take on that as an artifact? How detailed, how much analysis should a PM be doing? How should they make sure that they don't have a crazy high artifact burden?
So one of the stories I tell in this first chapter of the book, sorry for all the hidden promotion, is the story of the tabbed inbox. You know, if you use Gmail, if you use this type of inbox, you will get social broken up into a separate tab and promotions, and there are a couple of other tabs you can optionally have. And that was a highly risky project that initially no one wanted to do. Management, the team, everyone was kind of against it. It was my idea. I had a different UI in mind, which probably would have failed. Luckily, the team rescued me from that. But what really helped is that I managed to run these experiments very quickly. First, we just ran a data analysis to show how terrible is the experience of Gmail users, the casual users, not you and I. We know how to use labels and other things. I'm assuming you're using Gmail. But the ordinary user just gets tons of messages. And back then, it was all into this one long inbox. And they had to sort through these piles of trash, and they didn't know how to go back to messages. It was really confusing for them. They had tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of unread messages. So just this data analysis plus a usability test created a lot of evidence. I showed this to my managers, and they were like, wow, we didn't realize that. So I managed to greenlight a little project, just get a few engineers on it. And then we created a very rudimentary, basic version of the inbox. We tried it on our own inboxes. And then I started enabling the private inboxes of the managers and marketing managers and all sorts of people. Everyone hated it until they used it. And then they said, whoa, actually, there is something there. So gradually, and then we did dog food and we did a million other things, and I constantly shared the results. That was my superpower. I was not a very senior, but I had the data. And I noticed something very interesting. When people see the data and people experience the value, they tend to do the right thing. So whatever the format, I don't know, I don't have a set opinion how to share it. Sharing your evidence is super crucial for you as a PM. With evidence, the junior person can really reject the opinion of the senior manager. And a lot of managers will accept it. So use the evidence. It does require that you start developing this skill that at the end of each cycle of testing, you will analyze the data. You need to develop this. It's a crucial skill for product managers that a lot of product managers don't do. I teach that in my workshops as well. And then publish the results. And then sometimes bring experts to help you if you need. Or at Netflix, they have a weekly standing session. Bring in your experiment results, and some people who are very good at that help you interpret what we are seeing. That's a good practice too. So analyze and publish. And whatever the format, I'm sure your format is great. I will check it out, but just do it.
Yeah, I'm actually curious to hear your reaction to my format. So what I recommend to people is, if at all possible, recruit a product analytics partner. Now that function has really, really grown, and bring them in, especially for your big rock features before, to say, hey, can you first validate my North Star metric, my secondary and guardrail metrics, and the other things I want to measure? And can you please make sure that the engineers will be able to put in the right tracking events so we can measure them? And can you also then help us create dashboards in whatever A/B testing infrastructure we have to look against these 5 or 6 most important metrics? Then I think you can kind of just use a scientific method to write your features results right up very fast. You go to your PRD, you say, this was my North Star. I pulled a chart just from the thing that my analyst created for me. This was my secondary metrics. I pulled a chart. Then you write them up, and then you take a second and you look at all of them and you're like, okay, well, here's a bunch of results. Nobody wants a bunch of results. Here's the story of the results. And you put that story right at the top. So that's how I recommend doing it quickly. I'm curious to your reaction.
I love it. I think you can do the same also with user research if you have user researchers. I think some of your listeners now are thinking at the back of the mind, Aakash is very, very lucky to have these resources available to him. In many companies, this data function doesn't exist, or sometimes it exists inside business intelligence, which is actually working more for marketing and sales, and you're lucky if you get some of their cycles. So guess who needs to do this? So I think in those cases, you need to learn how to use Mixpanel or Amplitude or whatever the tool is, and do your own dashboards and collect your own events and do all this hard work. It's a challenge initially, but once you learn once, it gets easier. And you need to get good at statistical analysis and all sorts of things you don't expect that were useful that you learned back in high school. And this will be tremendously helpful for your team if you can do that. So be scrappy. Get the resources if you have. If not, learn to do it yourself, but just do it. It's super crucial.
Yeah, I've been in some of those situations where I couldn't get the analyst resources. Sadly, like growth teams, they always get second after core product teams. So my teams were often the ones I would have to go back to my PMs and say, yeah, I know I hired you on this being a great environment, but you don't even have an analyst. And just some techniques, I'm curious what you think about them. What things that worked for me. Number one is, can you enable your engineers to do this? So at Epic Games, all my engineers love this tool called Grafana. So what I would do in my PRDs is I would just explain exactly what the Grafana chart should look like. And then they would go build that right when they created the event, because they need to test the event anyways. They need to look at how the event is pushing through the telemetry. So that could be one option, is like pre-specify so your engineers help you. And then the second, like you said, is buy a tool that makes it much easier. I think not that many companies actually use Mixpanel or Amplitude because these are very expensive. They just say, oh, PM, go use Tableau. PM, go use Looker, or use SQL, the worst. But if you're stuck using those, like, that's a full-time job. And then you need to really tell your managers and things like that, hey, all I'm doing tomorrow is just analyzing this experiment.
Yeah. Well, I think the idea of using your engineers, especially backend engineers, is vital. I mean, in Gmail, when I worked there was no chance that I would be able to dig into all the backend details. Just the number of modules that are composing Gmail and the number of things, of events that are collected is mind-blowing. So I had to find the right backend engineers to do these things. And usually they were happy to do the data pool or to create the chart that they needed. And it goes back to what we said earlier, that engineers don't just need to code. Engineers can do research, and this is research. This is asking people to find some engagement metric and show how it's different between these two customer segments. It's a form of research, and a very important form. And yeah, at one time you'll have all the data pipelines in place and all the data warehouse and all the tools aligned, all the stars. But until then, you need to just figure out a way. And often the shortcut is to use your team for that. And it's a great use of their time. It's really, really important because that one chart can save them a ton of work later developing the wrong thing. So I love your suggestions.
All right. So we've covered the PM artifacts. We've tried to help make your job easier. Now, what is your main job as you're trying to prioritize everything as a PM? You started the interview at the very beginning with the 4 risks. Do you think it's fair to say that risk reduction ultimately is the main job of a PM, and that's how you should think about your North Star?
I think it's true to a certain degree. I just find it a very uninspiring job description. I tend to think of PMs as the people that kind of drive the process of discovering that product that maximizes value delivery and value capture. Product management is something that I believe the entire company is doing in collaboration, but there is one function that's their main thing. They are focused on constantly evaluating the value we're giving and receiving, and kind of creating this virtuous loop and trying to, and the higher up you are in the chain, the more you are focused on this, I'm sure, as you know. So I find this more correct and inspiring. And I think if you just focus on risk aversion, that's just one side of the coin. Some companies don't take enough risks. And sometimes it's about pushing people to take more risk, to actually try out more ambitious ideas, because risk aversion is a real thing in a lot of companies. So being good at evaluating ideas and really seeing what's kind of, at least on paper, what's the impact that they will have on the goals is the first step. Because if you are setting a target, you're setting a goal, and all your ideas are just these must-have incremental things, you should see that you're not going to achieve your goal by doing these low-risk things. You need to find a much bigger fish to try to catch a much bigger fish. And then testing is another thing that kind of teaches people, and it also eliminates some of the risk, because you can de-risk an idea by looking at the evidence. What are some of your tips in this area?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. And that's the distinction I wanted people to layer on. We've talked for an hour now about different ways to improve your job, improve your confidence, reduce risk, but it's not just about that. And in fact, my argument would be that the number one mistake that junior PMs make is they just assume that the surface area they were given, the problems they were given, the metrics they were given were all the right things to work on. But if you go look at, for instance, in the last 2 to 3 years, which PM teams were laid off, it wasn't related to how many % of their OKRs they were hitting. It wasn't related to, how the engineers and designers thought about the PM. It was literally that entire team was just focused on the wrong area. They weren't taking enough risk. They were just making these little incremental shifts because executives wanted them and customers were asking for them, but they never actually moved forward the business in any significant way. And so not taking risk is a bigger problem than just taking too much risk.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you may get some heat for doing risky things in your company, but if you're very transparent about it and you're showing why it's a calculated risk and why the risk reward is worthwhile, I think a lot of reasonable managers will let you go with it. Another thing that I think a lot of companies need to move away from is judging decisions by the results, and rather should judge decisions by the process that led to them, because there are unknowns that we cannot predict, and there is no perfect decision mechanism or prioritization. As long as we're doing the right things, statistically we will triumph. But just if you are pushing people to always succeed and you're punishing mistakes, quote unquote, then you will get a very risk-averse organization.
Okay, so let's move into some different PM hot topics. Probably, I would say, outside of design thinking generally, the hottest export out of the design field into product management has been the double diamond. Everybody's using it these days. One of the most common charts that people cite from my newsletter, for instance, is when I put the double diamond next to the PRD. And so the double diamond is just one of those frameworks that everybody loves. But you're not a huge fan. Why?
It's true. Honestly, I didn't use this model, and I encountered it only in the last few years. I actually did a Google Trends thing, and I saw it kind of picked up 2008 17, 18, it became much hotter during this time. I don't know if you know the history, but it's based on some model that was created for linguistics. Then it was adopted for design and was not invented, but kind of publicized by the British Council of Design, not for software design necessarily, for design projects at large. And for people who don't know the double diamond, it kind of breaks the process of design into two phases. There's exploratory research, where you are actually converging and trying to map out the problem space, essentially. And so you converge, you consider multiple... sorry, did you get a noise just now?
All good. So you're exploring multiple areas. Yeah, so you like diverge and then converge in exploration.
So you're exploring the problem space until you converge into a point which is the problem or the small set of problems that you need to solve. And only then you can start exploring solutions, which are what I call ideas. And then again, you converge. You evaluate multiple solutions, what we call product discovery, and then you converge. So in theory, this is a great model. It actually aligns with what I said, research, discovery, delivery. However, even in the design circles, and including in the British Design Council, no one still considered this a very useful model, partly because with the introduction of digital design tools, it's now so much easier to switch into evaluative mode. Before you don't have to map out the entire product space. What designers tend to do is, as they're evaluating the problems, they're already also in parallel starting to evaluate, doing discovery, just like I showed in the roadmap slide. And that's actually the way most people prefer to work. So this very sequential way of working is probably incorrect, including the British Design Council said we don't promote the double diamond anymore. But somehow a lot of us in the product community, the software product community, didn't get the memo. And we're still showing the classic, very formalized design model. And it's still very frowned upon by some people to say, you're starting to talk about solutions, but we didn't map out the entire problem space. And that's really where I'm kind of trying to avoid. And that's my objection.
Okay, so what I'm thinking is like there's two diamonds like this. You would be okay if we kind of had them aligned on top of each other, where there was an ability to be parallelly exploring solutions before you converge on your problem.
Exactly. And I think that's the reality of the situation in most product companies anyway.
Yeah, and I think it's also very important to enable product people to input on the solution. As I was mentioning earlier, I feel that there was this pendulum swung where it was like designers were like, no, you can't get into my Figma file. Design VPs were like, no, you can't have a Figma seat. And it was just like we were trying to push people away. Even those sketches you talked about, those whiteboard sketches and PRDs, people started getting mad about those. And they started saying like, yeah, you just can't have any solution exploration. And if you'd put a prototype in front of all hands for your strategy, they'd say, oh, you're anchoring us too much in your prototype now. But we really need to like flip the script a little bit. Like you need to do both at the same time, and you have to have that ability to say, yes, we showed you this prototype, but it may change dramatically.
Yeah, totally. I think some of the things you mentioned are not best design practices necessarily. They're more like people connecting a lot of their personal identity with the process of design and with the mock-ups and taking a lot of ownership. And by doing that, inadvertently, they're pushing away other people. They're not allowing the team to collaborate. And I've seen also heads of design contributing to this by creating internal design agencies and pulling out designers from teams. They're not embedded there. They're working in the agency model. So those are some anti-patterns in my mind. Those are also regressions back to an older time. I much prefer for designers to be embedded and for us to work in collaboration. And I think, don't burn me, designers, it's okay for a PM or an engineer to draw a very ugly mock-up or sketch just as a way to communicate an idea. We don't expect you to take it. We know we didn't do the right process to get there. It's just our way of suggesting. So don't be cross with us if we do this.
And I think that everybody's eyes are going to glaze over because I mentioned AI, but we have to bring it up. I mean, with AI making these things much more efficient, like even just the ability to have that whiteboard sketch or even take that whiteboard sketch into a working prototype. We see tools like Playground with like a few sentences, you can create that. It seems like we need to adopt to the new era where you don't need a full design expertise. You don't need few days to create these sketches. Like we're going to move to this parallel world where we're actually exploring things much quicker, much faster because of the tools we have.
That's true. I think there's a big hype cycle, and we're kind of probably overestimating the ability of the current generation of tools to do some of these things. But I think if you want to create quick prototype to test with customers, say in a usability test, that's great news, because sometimes what the AI will give you is all you need, and you're saving some time. I just feel that proper design requires so much more than just spitting out a mock-up, and proper product management is not about spitting up a PRD. So those are at best kind of co-pilots that help us with these more mundane tasks. But really, no one should assume that these generative AI tools are going to cut into the workforce and replace designers or engineers or PMs. Although I'm pretty sure some MBAs are already thinking that.
All right. So that was about an hour and a half on the craft of product management. Now I want to switch into PM at Google, because you've worked at Microsoft, you've worked at Google, you had a great career in product management. But when I go and talk to people, Google is still the place that everybody wants to break into as a product manager. So how did you personally break into Google as a PM?
The usual way, I applied. I didn't expect to be hired because I met so many people who climb up the arduous process of getting hired, and then got rejected at the very last step. So I went through this process, and I just got hired. I don't know why. And later on, I developed this theory that it's a process that doesn't just not necessarily finds the best people, but finds the most lucky people. So I had just a sequence of very easy interviewers, I think. But just to give you a gut feeling, kind of a ballpark number, I interviewed throughout my time at Google around 200 PMs. I think one or two of them really got hired. It's so hard to get accepted. I don't know today, but that was the statistics back then.
Yeah, that is what I've heard. So when I was at Google 2019, they said that it was harder to get into Google product management than any college, any such thing like that. I think they cited like Stanford was like 3% acceptance rate. It's even lower than that for Google. I imagine just to get the interview, and then you have the same whittling process post interview. So it is very hard, but I would say you didn't just get lucky. I think that, I've noticed some trends coaching a lot of people trying to get into Google. And what was the most relevant area of your background? That you were a PM at another big tech. Like Google loves to hire PMs from Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook. Why? Because you've had to work in an environment with that much scale, with that many cross-functional teams, with that much hierarchy. Like, you know, you're like 12 levels away from Larry, but you still have to go present to him. And so I think that's also a unique thing that people need to realize, which is you broke into the best company because you worked your way up through the hierarchy of companies.
Absolutely, yeah. There was a huge cohort of ex-Microsofties, and I think there's a huge cohort of ex-Googlers inside Facebook for that very same reason.
Yep. What was it like being a PM at Google? Because I think it can be idealized. Even we might have idealized it a little bit right now. We're talking about how like the engineers really care about working, how we have analytical support, how we're able to be empowered and go after metrics and problems. What was it like for you? What was a day in the life? What were the flip sides of that wonderful way of working?
I'm interested to hear your take as well as someone who worked there. I think the positive side of Google, it's not just that you're working on these amazing products that touch the lives of so many people, and most of the people would love your product. Once you tell them you work on YouTube or on Gmail, they're just so happy to tell you how much they love it. So this is really rewarding, and you have this sense of impact. But you're working with incredible people, really, really smart people, very, very nice, very collaborative people. Well, again, I'm speaking mostly for the teams I work with in YouTube and Gmail. People that really cared about the success of the users, the very, very customer-centric people who also cared about doing the right thing for Google and for the world in general. So that's really inspiring, and it pushes you to up your game to stand up to that level of quality of the people around you. So that's what I really liked. I think what I didn't like at the time was that I found Google more corporate than I expected. From the outside, it has this image of this very innovative, very open-minded, very collaborative company. But then, and when you get kind of introduced inside in Google, they tell you, yeah, we don't like a lot of process, etc. But OKRs, but we want this, but snippets, and there's a fair amount of process and bureaucracy and levels of management and reviews. So I was a bit surprised by that. It differs from product area to product area, so you cannot generalize across all of Google. And I was a bit disappointed, and there's another story I tell in the book, that Google kind of abandoned its more evidence-guided thinking back in the early 2000s and started doing these big bets things. I had a small part in Google Plus, working for Gmail, and that really kind of gave me a sense that Google is heading towards the wrong direction on a lot of things. And I think a lot of Googlers at that point also felt it. But I'm curious if things have turned around while you were there.
So when I was there, I was in Google Cloud. Further than that, I was within the Bebop team. So basically the Google Cloud CEO at the time, she was acqui-hired, and she had a startup, and I joined that startup when they were acquired. So I had this unique environment of basically working for a startup. So it was not, I think, like what PMs at Gmail and YouTube experience, but I still tried to network with a lot of other PMs. And I would say that the flip side that most people don't realize first, this is a highly paid job, which means you usually have to work to earn that money. I did not meet a single PM who, like, if you walk by their desk around 5 o'clock, they're not still there. These weren't the people, like, you'll often see your engineering buddies, they might be working, but they'll like leave the office at like 3:30 or something like that after their meetings are done. And you might see also your execs, right? They often have like kids and families and stuff like that. They might leave at 3, 4, 4:30 even at Google. But your PMs, they're usually grinding away. Usually when you go look at their calendar, a lot of these calendars were open, you would see that they're triple booked from 9 to 5. But then at the same time, they would be having to work for, let's say, a product review with their skip level VP tomorrow. And a lot of PMs, they do come from those backgrounds where they would just pull an all-nighter. They would just stay up till 3 a.m. They'd catch 2 hours of sleep, and then they'd hit the product review. And you know what happens in the product review once you get there, right? The VP has one little nitpick. He zones in on that for 45 minutes and he says, come back next week. And you never even got to your content. So that's what I learned was kind of the flip side of what's so beautiful, like having so much support, having such great colleagues, having a true product environment was hard work, stressful work, and a lot of layers of management.
Yeah, so it sounds like things are a little worse off compared to when I was there. But I think it's typical of a highly structured, somewhat bureaucratic company where the PMs are kind of the glue. They have to connect so many dots and they need to work with so many levels of management on multiple units and divisions and disciplines that you're just fully booked with meetings, and it's not conducive to actually exploring the market, the users, focusing on what's going on in the technology, which are very important things for PMs to do. So yeah, I would say that's a negative.
Yeah. And for me personally, like now I'm a writer, like I'll block off 6 hours of my day just to write something. I never had that luxury at Google.
Yeah, it's true.
All right. So now I'm going to shift to the PM job market. The PM job market has been brutal lately. I've been talking to experienced PMs, 8, 10 years of experience as product managers, and they're stuck on the job market without a job because maybe they were laid off or they left their job for personal reasons for 6, 9, 12 months. What is your advice for these experienced PMs who are struggling with job searching?
I think the generic advice that you can give anyone who's trying to get hired or trying to be booked as a consultant or trying to have people read their blog or their book is that you need to be somewhat unique. You need to create an environment where you are different from the rest. You have some skills or some experience or you're famous for some reason, and that makes so many things easier once you're able to do that. So I didn't have this as a PM, so I had to bust my way the usual way. But you and I are in this sphere where we are slightly more famous now, and you know how every time you climb the rings of a little bit more famous, it opens up more doors for you. So I don't know if it's a very useful advice, but if you can build some unique skills that the marketplace is going to look for, AI is one right now, or other ones, go for that.
100%. What I've seen a trend to versus when I started in product back in 2008 is people care about your subspecialty of PM nowadays. Before, it was kind of enough to just be a good PM and have good names on your resume. Now it's like, are you a fintech PM with experience in payments for developer products? Okay, now you might be a fit for Stripe. Are you a PM who's worked in AI, has a background querying data, and understands data pipelines? Okay, now you might be a fit for Databricks. So for all of these hottest companies, these sexiest companies, they're looking for people who have built up beyond just that product management skill set. So I always tell people to find your corner of the market, something that ideally you can kind of create a market of one. Like, how many people are there talking about how to improve evidence for PMs? It's just Itamar. So you've created your market of one. How do PMs on their own create their own market of one? I think is the challenge for folks.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing to do. By the way, evidence is not a market of one. There are far smarter and more capable people than me to speak about this topic. However, it is important for you to understand what is your niche. I was a generalist, and today I would probably, if I was in the market, I would try to find more of a specialty. So, but do you see organizations actually rejecting people who are otherwise look great, they work at good companies, they have the right skills, they sound good, at least on paper, but they don't have this very unique specialty?
Yeah, I see two things. So first of all, we were talking about people with job gaps. I find that there's a huge bias against people with job gaps. The people who have a job now, they're not facing the issue that I'm talking about. But for those people with job gaps, what ends up happening is they'll look at you versus somebody else. They already have the job gap in their mind. And then they might say, well, that guy, he worked in fintech payments, developer products, and you just worked in regular fintech. And that will be kind of the final thing. So you might get the interview. You might even make it to the final round, but it's that final getting the offer where people end up having second thoughts if you don't have that either domain or functional expertise.
It's true. What do you think about having in your resume working at one of these famous companies, one of the FANG companies, for example?
It's a plus and a minus. So the plus is that everybody wants to hire people from these companies. The minus is nobody thinks they can afford them. So it's very important to kind of have that initial first call with people, say, what is your salary range? And then say, yeah, I'm okay with that, because nobody's going to be able to pay you those Bang RSU vests that vest like $150K liquid each year anymore. And if they are able to pay you that, it's probably going to be in like ISOs where you're not going to realize the value for quite a bit of time.
Right. Okay. That's good advice for people to know.
Yep. And then the market for aspiring PMs also seems to be as compressed as ever. And I bet you, just because of how big you are in LinkedIn and X, a lot of them are writing to you like they write to me. What is your best advice for those university and MBA students who want to become PMs?
I ask them to look inside and ask themselves if they really love building things, if they really, because as you mentioned, it's a hard job and it's a time-consuming job, and it requires developing a lot of skills that not all of us are blessed with. And you really need to love it to be successful at it. It's not something you're just, wow, it feels great to control the world, so I want to be a PM. You need to be really devoted and to have to really, at least some indication that you have the skill set. And I find that most people don't. And a lot of them are aspirational PMs. They think it's a good idea, but they have no data points to suggest that they are actually going to be good at it. And when it comes to actually thinking about building things and working with technical people and with business people, they're not that excited. So I think what are your goals first before you take this trip. What about you?
Yeah, I think that there's personality traits and then there's skill traits. So personality wise, think back to high school. Like, did you like being in group projects, or were you just that person who like hated it and thought everybody else was useless? Because most people are actually in that camp. You're going to have trouble being a product manager. You're going to have trouble corralling designers and engineers to a common cause to build a feature. So there's like this teamwork element. Then there's this other element just around hard work, which I think is really a personality thing. Some people, they want to have, especially in this younger generation, they want to have 7 to 8 hour workday. They want to be able to go to Europe every 3 months for a week or two. And that is incredibly difficult in this PM job. So if you have those types of expectations from a personality point of view, you can really be setting yourself up for failure. So those are the personality elements that I think about. And then I think about the skill elements. And I have to be honest, and this is going to get me canceled by some people, but if you're not a top performer, if you weren't getting all A's, or if you weren't really succeeding in sports, you are really going to have a hard time in product management, especially at these best companies. They have an incredibly high bar for what people are doing. And so I think that there's this skill element around that. And then the final skill element is, are you interested in learning about technology? As you said, like some people, they don't want to get into coding. When I go tell them, go build a side project using ChatGPT, they're just like, no, like I could certainly never do that. And like, if you're that type of person, product management and like randomly learning SQL in a weekend because your product analytics tool shut down, you just won't be able to do that. So I think those are what I look for.
I like it all, except the part about being good at sports, which disqualifies me first and foremost. I think you nailed it on the head. There's so many skills going into that. This is the hardest job to actually hire for and to get hired for, because it requires such a unique combination of things. So it's really not for everyone. And a lot of people are going to be disappointed. Even if they get into the profession, it wouldn't feel right. There'll be not enough of forward motion for them. And a lot of people are better off in marketing, in sales, in design, in whatever it is that they are good at, rather than trying to force it in this very tough job.
So you wrote an entire first draft of the book and then sent that out to people and wrote several other drafts before publishing?
That's right. And that was probably a mistake. I should have started with just drafting the outline and just creating a webinar with the key messages and inviting people. Kind of what threw me off is that I was giving a workshop on the topics included in the book. I knew what people resonated with and what not. So I felt like I validated the idea enough, but there's a big gap between explaining it live to people with exercises and putting it into paper in a 50,000 word format. It's a really challenging thing to do. But luckily, my audience kept me in check. My product experience, I guess, helped, because I noticed that people are just not excited about the first two versions. They were like, it's in the right direction, but, and there was always a but. It's also about how you test. The first two cohorts, I gave free copies. I just recruited people randomly and asked who wants to read from my newsletter, and I gave them free copies. The second cohort, I invited people from my newsletter to buy a copy of the book. I charged it, I think, at $9.50 or something bucks. I put it on Gumroad. And I told them, if you're not happy, I will refund you. If you buy the actual book later on, I will refund you. And that worked much better. Then I established a community that was much more engaged. And I think that's a lesson that a lot of PMs can also implement. If you ask people to test something for free, you get a lot of bogus feedback. And they may not actually read it or use it. If you ask people to buy and to pay, you will get much more concrete feedback, and you will see if they're using it or not, and because they will ask for a refund. So I wish I started using this technique earlier as well.
That's awesome. I don't think I've heard anybody do that before. So basically, you had a pre-release of your book on Gumroad in order to get feedback. And how long between kind of that Gumroad pre-release, and what were the steps after that before finally publishing?
So that went fairly quickly. I think it was the whole thing was less than 6 months, and you should factor in that the last 3 months is just like editing and internal design, external design, uploading to fixing the images. I did a lot of it myself, so it was very time consuming. So yeah, that was a fairly fast and really satisfying cohort. And those people were, like we do in an early adopter program, they were the first reference customers as well. They were the ones willing to give me testimonials and to recommend the book on Amazon. So that was very helpful too.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations on the book success. What's next for you? Another book, more coaching? What are you thinking? What's the ideal next 5 years?
I'm still debating that one. The book requires a lot of energy out of me. I'm working on some online courses to share, just because I need to scale out a little bit more. And I think some people will benefit from a cheaper self-paced course. I'm thinking about the next book, still not quite sure what it is. It has to be a high-value problem for my target audience, which is product managers, product people in general. I have a few in mind. I might reach out to people and ask for feedback and hopefully do the process better this time. And yeah, just looking for opportunities to branch out and to do interesting stuff.
All right. That covers our long form questions. Are you ready for the lightning round?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right. What's your favorite question to ask product management candidates?
This is very old school, and I know people maybe think that this is not a good question anymore, but I really got a lot of value from asking people to design a regular product that we all know, but for a niche audience. So design a navigation system for old people, design a toaster for people with vision impairments, that sort of stuff. It's very old school. We used a lot of these questions at Google, and they tend to surface how good the person is at doing some of these common PM things, coming up, understanding the goal and the problem, empathizing with the user. You'd be surprised how many people just jump into the solution without even giving a second thought of who's the user, what are their needs. And that's a definite no-no if you do one of these questions. Their ability to evaluate different solutions to the same problem and to rank them. How do they test them? That will be a more modern version of it that I would do today. And also, if you give them some feedback and say that in that experiment you learned that happened, what would you do? So it's a little bit more of the analytical part.
Okay, classic product design question. Outside of Evidence Guided, what's your favorite business book that in some way relates to product management or growth?
So the one I tend to go back to, again, not very original, is Inspired. I think Marty Kagan really gave us a very fundamental book. But it's a toss between Inspired and the Lean Startup. Those for me are the two classics that I keep finding gems in them, and I find things that I thought that I invented, but actually where these people express in such a better way than me. So two must-haves for every PM in my mind.
Yeah, Inspired is almost written like a fiction book in that you just don't put it down. Let's move into a product. What's a new product you've started using and enjoy?
So it's not really a new product, but it's new to me. There is this crazy, powerful video editing tool called DaVinci Resolve. You probably are familiar with it, and it's free. There's also a premium version that costs, I think, $200. It basically gives you editing capabilities that movie makers need, if you need them, at your fingertips. And there's a bit of a learning curve, but it's so amazing. It's so powerful. It's mind-blowing that it is free. So if you're doing any form of video editing, I highly recommend. I really am enjoying it now.
And even like some of the pros are switching from Adobe Premiere to DaVinci. So it has a lot of differentiated features.
True.
What product feature or product are you most proud of shipping or working on?
So there are actually two in my whole career that I'm like, wow, that was my footprint, my impact on the world. One was back in the early 2000s. I shipped voice over IP developer toolkit, or the developer SDK, essentially, in a company called Radvision. Doesn't exist anymore, but that thing got embedded into hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of early voice over IP phones and voice over IP exchanges and all sorts of things, and became quite famous. And this was my first adventure in product management. So I felt like, oh, I got this down. I understand how it works. Little did I know, I was just lucky. But that was successful. And then the tabbed inbox that I mentioned in Gmail, it's the first thing that today hundreds of millions of people see, whether they open it on mobile or on desktop. So that was a very high impact feature and a very satisfying one to develop and to launch. And I use it every day myself. I develop it because I was lazy with my own inbox. So that gives me some satisfaction.
Yeah, I think it's over 2 billion monthly active users for Gmail now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. What commonly held belief or saying do you disagree with?
I'm known to be negative on a lot of things. I'm not a big fan when people tell me we can do what you suggest, but we first have to launch these must-have features or these table stakes, as they are called. Otherwise, we're not a player in the industry. These are must-have. And then often, even if you ship all of them, you're just another player with the same old feature set. And most of them are not must-haves if you really dig deep into it. And there's a huge opportunity cost that you're wasting by following what everyone else is doing. So that's one. One that I would appreciate your opinion on. I'm not a big fan of American-style meritocracy, where there's this 10x people that we have to discover and promote, and then there's the people in the medium, and then the lower performers. And our job as leaders is to develop people constantly, like they were products almost. I worked at American companies, and I felt this was a bit over-engineered.
I think that I can definitely agree with the part where we don't have 10x people. And I think that's just kind of like a unicorn myth out there that there's suddenly like this 10x PM and most of your PMs are 1x PMs and they just don't know what great product management is or what great engineering is. At the same time, I do like the idea of being able to promote people really quickly. So a good example of this would be like Tomer Cohen at LinkedIn. I think he joined as a product manager and in 12 years he became chief product officer.
Wow, that's remarkable. So you think there should be a fast track for these exceptional talents while the rest of us will need to slog out and prove our abilities?
Yeah, I think that we do need that ability to just find those exceptional talents. And in product management, it's one of those fields that does tend to attract those because it tends to attract a lot of former founders.
All right, so it's a whole can of worms we might open in a different discussion maybe, but I think measuring PM performance is extremely difficult because PMs are so dependent on their teams to actually deliver, and we don't create anything of tangible that the users can touch or the business can benefit from. And I found, and I'm sure that's not the case with Tomer and LinkedIn or with many good people, some people are just very good at gaming the system and making all the right noises so the system recognizes them as exceptional, and then they get promoted faster and faster. They're good at networking, they're good at picking the project that are most visible and will get the most credits. They're good at politics. So I think it's not a completely unbiased system, in my opinion. But again, maybe I'm projecting too much from my experiences in certain companies.
Oh, it's 100% true. You see so many like bad apples move through those systems. We'll have to have that on our next discussion, maybe our next 2-hour podcast. Before we go, where can people find you online and what can they do to help you?
So I'm pretty easy to find. I'm on my website is like my name, itamargilad.com. I assume you will link to that. And if you want to find my book, it's evidence-guided, one word, .com, and you'll find there my connections on LinkedIn and Twitter, so please feel free to reach out and connect. And if any of the things I mentioned sounds interesting to you, you can also download them as free resources. So the confidence meter, the GIST board, I have a ton of other free stuff. So feel free, and the only thing I want to get in return is that reach back to me and tell me how it works for you. Just like this story you told me just now was very interesting about how you use the confidence meter internally. Both good and bad. I need the feedback.
All right. Give Itamar the feedback. I'm sure most of it will be good. And well, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, that was a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find out about the podcast. You can find all the past episodes or learn more about the show at product-growth.com. See you in the next episode.